It's a beautiful thing to feel loved, but not everyone gets that chance in the end. The lives of black stars often sparkle with fame, fortune, and admiration. From red carpets to roaring crowds, it all seems picture perfect. But behind the glamour lies a much darker truth. For many, that spotlight fades long before their final moments. Some died alone. No family, no friends, no echo of the applause that once followed their every step. They were legends once. Now, all that remains is silence and sorrow. Don't believe it? Then stay with me as we uncover the heartbreaking final chapters of 15 black celebrities who left this world in the cold shadow of forgotten fame. Red Fox, the undisputed king of comedy, died the way no legend should: broke, bitter, and alone, right there on set. In the 1970s, he was one of the highest-paid comedians in America, raking in over $4 million a year. He had it all: lavish mansions, flashy cars, and even his own casino. But Fox lived fast. He gambled like a high roller, spent money like it grew on trees, and gave it away just as quickly. "I'm not leaving anything behind," he once said. "I spent it all." And he wasn't lying. By the time the IRS came knocking, he was over $3.6 million in debt. They seized everything: his homes, his cars, his jewelry. What remained was a rundown apartment in Las Vegas, where the once great comic lived in obscurity. Forgotten, angry, alone. His legendary charm had faded, and his bitterness drove people away. Then, in 1991, came a lifeline: a role on a new sitcom, The Royal Family. It was supposed to be his big comeback. But his body had already paid the price for years of hard living. On the day of filming, Fox stepped onto the set looking worn down, barely able to stand. He clutched his chest, gasping for air. But no one moved. No one rushed to help. They thought it was a gag, just another Fred Sanford moment, pretending to have a heart attack for laughs. But this time, it was real. His face froze. His body stiffened. He collapsed. And the crew kept laughing, thinking it was part of the act. 30 seconds. 60. 90. Until the laughter stopped, and the horror set in. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. The ambulance came, but Red Fox was already gone. Dead on the very stage that was meant to resurrect his career. No wife. No children. No one holding his hand in those final moments. His bank account was nearly empty. The man who once made millions didn't even have enough for his own funeral. Friends had to pool money together to lay him to rest. How does a life that once glittered so brightly end in such quiet tragedy? Screamin' Jay Hawkins was a man who lit up the world with madness, but died in silence. The voice behind "I Put a Spell on You" didn't just sing. He howled, growled, and shrieked like a man possessed. On stage, he was pure theater, clutching skulls, rising from coffins, casting spells with every note. He wasn't just a performer, he was a rock and roll sorcerer. By the 1960s, Hawkins had built a life of wild abandon, booze, women, and raw, untamed music. He claimed to have slept with over 1,000 women and fathered anywhere from 57 to 100 children. But here's the truth: he was never a father to any of them. They didn't grow up with his love, just his legend. Just a voice on the radio. Just a ghost on stage. He lived like a myth and drank like a man trying to forget something deep. Whiskey. A bottle a day, sometimes more. He bounced from smoky clubs in the States to dim-lit bars in Europe, spending every dime as fast as it came in. His health fell apart, but Hawkins never slowed down. Then, in 2000, it all caught up to him. In France, he collapsed from brutal chest pain. Doctors rushed him into emergency surgery in New Jersey. An aortic aneurysm was tearing him apart from the inside. And as they wheeled him into that cold operating room, not a single loved one was there. Just strangers and bright lights. He died on that table. 70 years old. Alone. When the hospital tried to contact his family, no one came. No child. No lover. No friend. His body lay unclaimed for days. The hospital had to bury him themselves. Screamin' Jay Hawkins, a man who once electrified the world, who claimed 100 children and lived louder than life itself, left this world without a soul by his side. No money. No farewell. Just silence where the screaming used to be. Ike Turner, from rock and roll royalty to a lonely, drug-fueled death. Ike Turner was once hailed as the godfather of rock and roll, the man behind Rocket 88, the man who helped launch Tina Turner into superstardom, and a powerhouse with millions in the bank, flashy cars, and palatial mansions. In the 1970s, his name was thunderous in music circles. But behind the fame was a man unraveling. Cocaine became his religion. He blew through fortunes like pocket change, throwing lavish parties, buying cars just to park them, living like a king with no thought for tomorrow. But the drugs didn't just drain his wallet. They twisted his soul. Ike became violent, abusive, a nightmare Tina had to escape from one stormy night in 1976, fleeing with nothing but 36 cents to her name. Their bitter divorce 2 years later stripped him of everything. The songs that once made him rich now belonged to Tina. The world moved on. Ike was left behind. With his fortune gone and his reputation in shambles, Ike drifted through life like a ghost in his own house. He sold off everything, even the legendary guitar he used to record what many consider the very first rock and roll track. A comeback in the 90s fizzled. Record labels shut their doors. Old friends looked the other way. All he had left were empty bottles and needles. On December 12, 2007, Ike Turner died alone in a rundown house in San Marcos, California. There was no one to hold his hand, no one to call for help. When they found him, he was surrounded by the wreckage of his former life, scattered drug paraphernalia, cheap liquor, and silence. The coroner ruled it a cocaine overdose, worsened by chronic lung disease. His funeral was nearly empty. No Tina. No children. No crowd of mourners. The man who once ruled the stage died a forgotten soul, buried beneath the weight of addiction, violence, and a legacy too scarred to celebrate. Etta James, the indomitable queen of blues, once lit up the world with a voice that could stop time. Her rendition of At Last wasn't just a song. It was a moment, a memory, a masterpiece. She had everything: fame, fortune, Grammy wins, and the love of a nation. But behind the spotlight was a storm of suffering. Addiction clung to her like a shadow. In the 1960s, she earned hundreds of thousands a year, only to watch it vanish into a $1,000 a day heroin habit. When the money dried up, she sold her Grammy awards, her diamond rings, even resorted to theft. In 1973, she was caught forging morphine prescriptions. Rehab followed, cold concrete floors, the agony of withdrawal, and a faint hope of change. But the darkness was too deep. She relapsed, and drugs robbed her of more than her career. They stole her family. Her sons, Danto and Sameto, grew up motherless in many ways, while Etta vanished into alleyways and addictions. By the time she tried to reconnect, the distance was too great. By the 2000s, her body was breaking. Years of abuse left her ravaged by hepatitis C, dementia, and leukemia. The once commanding star faded into a fragile shell, bald, barely 84 pounds, and too weak to walk. On January 20, 2012, in a sterile hospital room in Riverside, California, Etta James took her final breath. No children by her side. No family. Just a few nurses who barely knew her. The room was cold, silent. No tears. No last goodbyes. She left this world not in the spotlight, but in solitude. A woman who once ruled the stage, now reduced to silence. Her body bore no trace of the icon she once was, but her voice, that voice, still echoes through time. Donny Hathaway, a soul cut short by silence and shadows. Donny Hathaway wasn't just a singer, he was a soul genius. His voice wrapped itself around you in a song for you and warmed cold Decembers with this Christmas. At his peak, he was electric, lighting up stages, adored by fans, and touching hearts across the world. But behind that golden voice was a man slowly slipping into darkness. It began in the early 1970s. Just as his star was rising, Donny's mind began to unravel. He heard whispers no one else could hear. Sleep became impossible. Paranoid schizophrenia, doctors said. But Donny refused the pills. Instead, he drowned his demons in alcohol, desperate to silence the voices. It didn't help. It only pulled him deeper. He became convinced his own wife was trying to kill him. He locked the doors, cut off friends, shut out the world. The woman who once loved him walked away, broken by the man he had become. His children drifted into the distance. Friends were scared to reach out. The man who once filled rooms with music became a ghost in his own life. Then came January 13, 1979. That night, Donnie was in New York, recording with his longtime collaborator Roberta Flack. But something was off. He couldn't focus. He rambled about his brain being wired by unseen forces. Roberta, heartbroken and helpless, left him alone in room 1506 at the Essex House Hotel. The room was cold, quiet, just Donnie and the shadows. He said he heard knocks, voices, but no one was there. At exactly 12:06 a.m., a terrible sound shattered the silence, a body hitting pavement. Donnie Hathaway had fallen from the 15th floor. The scene was horrific. His body broken beyond recognition. There were no signs of struggle in the room. The bed was perfectly made. A half-empty liquor bottle rolled across the floor. Staff said they hadn't heard a thing until the end. That's how the world lost Donnie Hathaway. Not in a blaze of glory, but in a chilling moment of despair. The man who gave us so much soul, so much beauty, left this world in terrifying loneliness. And even now, decades later, that final night still echoes with sorrow. O.J. Simpson, once a football icon, a national treasure, died not just from cancer, but from years of scandal, disgrace, and soul-crushing isolation. In the 70s and 80s, he was a superstar. His electrifying runs on the field lit up stadiums across America. He made millions in endorsements, appeared in blockbuster films like The Naked Gun, and was adored coast to coast. But all of that came crashing down in 1994. The nation stood frozen as O.J. was accused of brutally murdering his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ron Goldman. The trial became a media circus, broadcast live, turning tragedy into spectacle. Though he was acquitted, the stain of suspicion never washed off. Friends disappeared. Family kept their distance. He was no longer a hero, he was a pariah. The civil suit that followed drained him. Ordered to pay over $33 million, O.J.'s empire crumbled. The lavish mansions, luxury cars, and endorsement deals vanished. By the 2000s, he was broke, holed up in a worn-out Las Vegas home with nothing but a rusted car and fading memories. Then came 2007, armed robbery. The headlines exploded once again. O.J. was convicted and served 9 long years behind bars. When he was released, the world had moved on. His children wouldn't return his calls. Old friends winced at the mention of his name. He spent his final years in obscurity, alone and unwanted. In 2024, prostate cancer began its final assault. The same body that once bulldozed defenders now wasted away, frail and broken. On April 10th, inside that crumbling Las Vegas home, O.J. quietly died on his couch. It was 2:15 p.m. when a neighbor walked in and found him cold. No one was there. No family. No friends. Just the soft whir of an old ceiling fan echoing through a lifeless room. Cancer ended his life. But long before that, loneliness had already buried him. No goodbyes. No hands held. Just silence. And a legacy that ended in shadows. Rick James, the Funk King, died not in glory, but in silence, swallowed by drugs and disease. He once ruled the airwaves with Super Freak, lighting up the 80s with wild energy and unstoppable swagger. Rick James wasn't just famous, he was legendary. Sold-out tours, endless parties, mountains of cash, and women who adored him. He lived loud, fast, and flashy, lavish mansions, luxury cars, and a posse that followed him like royalty. But when the music faded and the crowds went home, Rick James turned to cocaine. Not just casually, desperately. It became his shadow, haunting every moment. He spent millions on week-long binges, burned through fortune and friends alike. Scandal followed scandal, drug charges, abuse accusations, lawsuits. The record labels turned their backs. The phone stopped ringing. His name, once chanted by thousands, became a whisper no one wanted to say out loud. In the 90s, he tried to stage a comeback, but his body had already paid the price. A stroke, diabetes, liver failure, his glory days were gone. The radio still played his hits, but no one asked how Rick James was really doing. He drifted away, cut off from family, buried under the weight of addiction and regret. By 2004, the man who once filled arenas lived alone in a rundown house in Los Angeles. No more velvet ropes or red carpets, just stained walls, scattered trash, and a body worn down by time and torment. His once proud face was gaunt, his hands shook from years of abuse. Then, just before sunrise on August 6th, a weak emergency call came from his bedroom. Minutes later, medics found him unresponsive, alone. No loved ones at his side. No one there to hold his hand. The autopsy revealed the grim truth. A heart attack triggered by 9 different drugs in his system, including cocaine. There was no grand farewell. No crowds lined the streets. No media circus. Rick James, the man who once danced in diamonds, was buried quietly, like the world had already forgotten he ever lived. Phyllis Hyman was a soul queen, graceful, gifted, and unforgettable. With her velvet voice and timeless hits like You Know How to Love Me, she lit up stages and captivated hearts. She was elegance personified, a woman whose power and poise masked a growing storm inside. At the height of her fame in the 1980s, she had it all: magazine covers, sold-out shows, record labels eager for her next big hit. But behind that spotlight, Phyllis was unraveling. Fame couldn't fill the emptiness. The pressure to stay perfect, the loneliness off stage, the silent battles with self-worth, she carried it all alone. Nights became darker. The drinks got stronger. Pills replaced peace. What began as a coping mechanism became a cage. She had no children, no lasting love, and as the years wore on, fewer friends who stayed close. The music industry that once chased her began to look the other way. By the early 90s, the applause faded. So did the phone calls. Alone in her New York apartment in June 1995, the glamour was long gone. The silence was deafening. Surrounded only by liquor, pills, and despair, Phyllis made a heartbreaking decision. On the night of June 29th, she took a fatal dose of sleeping pills. By morning, her assistant found her still and silent, gone at just 45. There were no final cries, no last-minute rescue. Just a quiet end that, to those closest to her, felt tragically inevitable. The news came and went. There was no massive public outcry, no star-studded memorial. Phyllis Hyman, once adored by millions, slipped away as quietly as the world had begun to forget her. But for those who still remember, her voice, rich with emotion and pain, remains a haunting reminder of the beauty she gave and the sorrow she carried. Prince, an icon, a genius, a force of nature. He wasn't just a pop star. He was a revolution wrapped in purple velvet. With soul-shaking hits like Purple Rain and When Doves Cry, Prince didn't just top charts, he redefined music itself. In the 80s and 90s, he was untouchable, sold out arenas, walls lined with awards, and millions of fans who worshipped his every move. But behind the glitter and genius was a man unraveling. As his fame soared, Prince grew more distant, folding into himself. The spotlight that once lit his path became a blinding burden. He had no circle, no solid ground. 2 marriages crumbled under grief. The death of his only child, just days after birth, left a scar that never healed. It hollowed him out, piece by piece. In private, Prince battled chronic pain and the silence of loneliness. He turned to painkillers not for pleasure, but to cope, to function, to keep creating. But the medicine that numbed his body also stole his life. On the quiet morning of April 21, 2016, Prince was found unresponsive in his Paisley Park estate, alone in an elevator. The world stood still. The cause? A fatal overdose of fentanyl, 50 times more potent than heroin. Worse, the pills he took were fake, laced with death. His final moments were likely filled with confusion and agony. A man who gave the world color and sound, left it in silence and shadow. Prince's tragedy isn't just that he died. It's that behind the brilliance, the fame, the myth, was a man no one truly saw. The greater his gift, the deeper his loneliness. The higher he soared, the more invisible he became. Billie Holiday. A voice the world loved, a soul the world left behind. Billie Holiday, the haunting voice behind Strange Fruit and God Bless the Child, was once the glowing star of jazz and blues. In the smoky clubs of the 1930s and 40s, her voice wrapped around every heart in the room, raw, aching, unforgettable. She wasn't just a singer, she was emotion in motion, a woman whose pain bled into every note. The spotlight adored her. Fans worshipped her. But fame, as it often does, gave her everything except peace. Behind the velvet gowns and standing ovations was a life unraveling. Billie fought private battles that no applause could silence. Crippling addiction, heartbreak, isolation. Her relationships crumbled, family drifted away, and the stage that once gave her purpose faded into silence. She had no children, no real home, and no one left to lean on. By 1959, the legend was fading fast. Penniless and sick, she spent her final days alone in a bleak New York hospital room, suffering from cirrhosis brought on by years of drug and alcohol abuse. On July 17th, she slipped into a coma. There were no crowds outside, no farewell tributes, only the sound of a heart giving up in a room where no one waited to say goodbye. There was no grand funeral, no loving hands to hold hers. Just Billie, forgotten by the world she once mesmerized. Her songs still echo across generations, but her final chapter is a sorrowful warning of how loneliness and addiction can silence even the most iconic voices. As she once sang with quiet resignation, "Don't explain." No one asked. No one stayed. And in the end, no one came. Jimi Hendrix, a once-in-a-generation talent, was a musical force the world couldn't forget, but also one it couldn't save. A rock legend and guitar god, Hendrix tore through the 1960s with electrifying hits like Purple Haze and Voodoo Child, redefining what the guitar could do. His sound was otherworldly, his style unmatched, and his name became a symbol of raw, rebellious genius. But behind the blazing spotlight was a man quietly unraveling. Isolated, misunderstood, and weighed down by fame, Jimi battled demons that no stage could silence. He drifted from friends and family, numbing his pain with a blur of parties, pills, and booze. Even at the height of his fame, Hendrix felt like a stranger in his own skin, lost in the crowd, detached from the world. On the night of September 18, 1970, in a small London flat, Jimi shared wine and dinner with a woman, seeking comfort in the quiet after the chaos. But that night turned fatal. Before bed, he swallowed 9 Vesperax sleeping pills, 18 times the safe dose. By morning, he was barely breathing. She found him unresponsive, and though paramedics rushed him to St. Mary Abbott's Hospital, it was too late. He choked to death on his own vomit, overdosed and overwhelmed. Jimi Hendrix didn't just die, he vanished under the weight of his brilliance and pain. His tragic end is a haunting reminder. Sometimes, even the brightest stars burn out in silence. Coolio, the tragic end of a rap icon. Coolio, the legendary voice behind Gangsta's Paradise, didn't just make music, he defined a generation. With his wild hair, raw lyrics, and fearless style, he broke barriers and climbed to the top of the charts, becoming a symbol of 90s hip-hop culture. But behind the fame and flashing lights was a man slowly unraveling. As the crowds faded and the awards gathered dust, Coolio's world began to collapse. Addiction crept in. Marriages crumbled. Family ties frayed. The spotlight he once thrived in now cast long shadows of loneliness. His fortune dwindled from reckless spending and bad decisions. His relationships, once full of love and laughter, vanished, one by one. Nights grew quieter, mornings colder. Fame had given him everything except peace. Then came September 28, 2022. Coolio was found dead in the bathroom of a friend's house in Los Angeles, a place he'd been staying to escape the noise of the world. No family by his side, no close friends, just silence and fentanyl. The powerful drug he used to numb the pain of years spent drowning in regret finally took him. It was a quiet death for a man who once owned the stage. The fall of a rap king, alone in the stillness. A heartbreaking reminder that even legends can be forgotten before their final curtain falls. Florence Ballard, Purple Dreams and a Tragic Fall from Grace. Florence Ballard, the raw, golden voice that gave soul to the Supremes, once stood at the very top of the music world. With hits like Baby Love and Stop. In the Name of Love, her voice echoed through radios and hearts across America. She co-founded the legendary group alongside Diana Ross and Mary Wilson, and for a brief, shining moment, Florence wasn't just part of history, she was history in the making. But behind the glamour, fame began to fracture. Group tension simmered, personal demons crept in, and Florence found herself drowning in a rising tide of pain. As Diana Ross rose to the front, Florence was pushed to the shadows. The drinking worsened. The arguments grew louder. And then the unthinkable, she was kicked out of the group she helped build. Her heart broke, and so did her future. From a chart-topping star to a forgotten woman, Florence's life unraveled. The stage was gone. The money vanished. She fell into deep poverty, relying on welfare checks, haunted by what could have been. Her days became a blur of silence and struggle, her nights soaked in sorrow and alcohol. On February 22, 1976, Florence Ballard died alone in a cold, run-down Detroit apartment. Not even her own daughter, Michelle, estranged and hurt, was by her side. A neighbor found her lifeless body hours later. No fanfare, no final tribute. Just the quiet end of a woman the world had already left behind. Cause of death: cardiac arrest, worsened by years of addiction and neglect. Florence Ballard's passing wasn't just a death, it was a heartbreak. A voice silenced too soon. A life never fully lived. And the saddest part? The world barely noticed. Gary Coleman, from millionaire child star to tragic Hollywood cautionary tale. Gary Coleman once lit up America's television screens as the lovable Arnold Jackson on Different Strokes, earning over $8 million before he was even old enough to vote. With his trademark line, "What you talkin' 'bout Willis?" And standing just 4 feet 8 inches tall, he became a giant in pop culture by the age of 10. But behind the charm and laughter was a childhood stolen. Instead of playing in parks or riding bikes, Gary was worked like a machine. His every smile and punchline turned into profit. His parents and managers bled him dry. By the time the show ended, so did his fortune. At just 18, Gary discovered that the millions he had earned were gone, spent, mismanaged, stolen. He sued his parents and manager, winning a fraction of what he was owed. But the real damage was never about the money, it was about trust. From fame to folding shirts, Gary was forced into odd jobs just to survive, working as a mall security guard, a store clerk, a fading face among strangers who once cheered for him. The media mocked him. Hollywood forgot him. His name became a punchline. In 2007, he married Shannon Price, hoping for peace. Instead, he found chaos. Their relationship was volatile and short-lived. They divorced in under a year. Yet Shannon never left. She stayed in his house, wielded control over his fragile world, and watched his health and spirit decline. On May 26, 2010, tragedy struck. Gary fell in his bathroom, hitting his head on the cold, hard floor. He was rushed to the hospital, suffering a brain hemorrhage. Less than 2 days later, Shannon, his estranged ex-wife, made the decision to pull him off life support. He died on May 28 at just 42 years old. There were no crowds mourning at his grave, no grand Hollywood farewell. No one claimed his body. Not his family. Not even Shannon. Once a millionaire child star adored by millions, Gary Coleman died broke, alone, and largely forgotten. His story a haunting reminder of what fame can take when no one is left to protect the soul behind the spotlight. DMX was more than a rapper. He was a force of nature. A storm that hit hip-hop with raw power, grit, and emotion. In 1998, he burst onto the scene with its Dark and Hell is Hot, selling over 5 million copies and launching a streak of chart-topping albums that defined an era. At his peak, he had it all. Over $30 million, luxury cars, sprawling mansions, and the kind of fame most only dream of. But behind the money and music was a man deeply wounded. Abused as a child, homeless as a teen, he turned to drugs at just 14. No amount of success could silence the pain that lived inside him. As his career soared, his demons dragged him down. By 2004, the cracks began to show. He was arrested more than 30 times for drugs, domestic violence, theft, and fraud. In 2018, he served a year in prison for tax evasion, owing millions. When he got out, the world had moved on. He was broke, forgotten, and without a label. The hits were still legendary, but they couldn't pull him out of the wreckage. Then came April 2nd, 2021. Not a comeback, a crisis. DMX suffered a drug overdose that stopped his heart for 30 minutes. The brain damage was irreversible. For 9 silent days, he lay in a coma at White Plains Hospital. No crowds, no tributes, no one at his side. On April 9th, he died. Alone. The lights dimmed on one of rap's fiercest voices. He left behind over 15 children, but not one was there in those final hours. His estate, once worth tens of millions, was down to barely $1 million. The man who once ruled hip-hop had become a cautionary tale. His story isn't just about fame and downfall. It's about the loneliness that lurks even in the brightest spotlight. If this touched your heart, tell us how in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because the truth behind Hollywood's glamour is often darker than you think. Thanks for watching. Until next time.